Hey everyone, I am here with Vince Poscente, and I'm super excited to have him. We just recorded a couple episodes of the podcast. We had a great time. He is a New York Times best-selling author. He's a professional public speaker. He's an Olympic athlete, so he's done a whole lot, and he's just a lot of fun to talk to. VincePoscente.com is his website, and his book that you can grab while you're there, while he has a few books. The Ant and the Elephant is the one we talked about most in the podcast. Vince, what's up, man?
Hey, good to be with you, Mario. So where are we going with this? Let's talk about something.
Yeah, that's a good question. These are casual conversations, so we just kind of riff a bit. But what I want to talk to you about a little bit, I think, is we talked a little bit about your Olympic background,
Uh-huh.
and you became an Olympic athlete really quickly. That's my puppy Waldo wants to say hi.
There you go.
You became an Olympic athlete very quickly. Olympic athletes are at the height of their field. They're the best of the best in the world, and you did it really fast. What are some of the things you used to become an Olympic caliber athlete?
I would say that the initial mindset would be applicable to everybody listening in on this or paying attention to this podcast, and to redefine your competition. Meaning, when I started ski racing with the goal of being in the Olympic Games, I found out very quickly that there were Olympic qualifying standards. Now, I'm a Canadian, and the Canadian Olympic qualifying standards is you got to be top 16 in the world or top half. So I immediately looked at who the top 16 were in the world. And so when I went to small races, I realized that my competition wasn't local, wasn't national, and it wasn't even international. It was ultimately the top 16 in the world, because that would mean I would make the Olympic team. And so the next realization that happens when you step into that mindset is they've had a 20-year head start. I mean, I started ski racing at 26. I was a recreational skier. I could do the blue runs, the black diamond runs were not pretty. And so what business does a recreational skier do wanting to make the Olympic team, or to be the top 60 in the world? And how would you possibly catch up with their 20-year head start? And the heroes of sport, or business for that matter, or even musicians, are the ones that work harder, that train harder, that go through scales, that just go through a nightmare to get to where they want to go. You know, these heroes are the ones that work harder. There's a motto in the Olympic Games. It's Citius, Altius, Fortius, which is swifter, higher, stronger. It doesn't say swiftest, highest, strongest. It's just how much faster can you go? How much higher can you go? How much stronger can you be? Citius, Altius, Fortius. Well, I added a fourth one, which is Smartius. How much smarter can you compete? So given all this context, your competition are the top 16 guys in the world. They had a head start, and how can you compete smarter? And it wasn't about working harder. It was about doing what the competition is not willing to do. There are things those top 16 guys in the world aren't willing to do. And if you want to know what your competition is not willing to do, look in the self-honesty mirror and ask yourself, what am I not willing to do? Because it's the same thing. So do what the competition's not willing to do. Ended up being that mindset necessary to really end up, after just 2 years, being ranked 10th in the world in the sport of speed skiing. Now, speed skiing was a demonstration sport in the Olympics in Albertville. Each host country, up until Barcelona, was allowed to select their demonstration sports. There were gold, silver, bronze medals, but each host country could choose those. So the French dominated in speed skiing. That's why they chose speed skiing. They felt they had a best shot at taking home more medals by hosting speed skiing. Straight down the side of the mountain, 0 to 60 miles an hour in 3 seconds, up to 125 miles an hour in 8 seconds. I mean, it's just straight down. So the barrier to entry was pretty low, especially for a recreational skier. But I wasn't the only one with this idea to go to the Olympic Games. There were actual ski racers who had the same idea, who had raced for the Canadian national team, the Austrian national team, the Swiss national team, the US national team, downhill racers who switched over knowing they'd have a better shot at getting to the Olympic Games in speed skiing than they would in downhill. So it was do what the competition's not willing to do that allowed me to supersede what most other athletes were all other athletes were doing, because I was just competing smarter.
What did you find your competition wasn't willing to do? Do you have a couple examples?
Yeah. Well, first, you can split this into 4 categories. What are the financial things you could do your competition's not willing to do? So while I was ski racing, I was selling real estate. Okay. And I had it all figured out. I would sell about 50 or 60 houses in August. That didn't happen. But anyway, to do what the competition is not willing to do in real estate meant that I was taking an angle on how to compete. I mean, I wasn't able to be there over weekends because most of us racers had jobs, and the weekend was the only time we could really train in earnest. And so I was unable to do open houses and stuff like that. Well, what I did was, well, what's the competition other realtors not willing to do? So I would do open houses on the weekdays to realtors, and I have this lasagna that will change your life, right? So I would have this lasagna at my realtor open houses. So instead of having an open house for a buyer, I would have an open house for a realtor who had 50 buyers or 20 buyers. And then, so it's just competing smarter. I mean, it's not the big things you do. The second column was
Wait.
physical.
We got to talk about this lasagna for a minute before we move on. Is this
Okay.
your lasagna? Is it family
It's a
recipe that's
family
been passed down?
recipe. No, it's a family
Okay.
recipe, and it takes hours to make. But when you taste, it's homemade pasta. It's the sugo that just, you
Okay.
know.
We're going to have to
Um,
talk about this one because you know that I used to be a chef, right? That
oh,
was my
well,
background.
I've got
So,
the family. Yeah, that's right. Well,
yeah.
I've got this family recipe. I'll take a snapshot of that. It's 5 pages of recipe from everything from the sugo. I
That's
mean,
amazing.
it's involved.
Lasagna is
Um,
one of my favorite things. It's like typically it's like an all day project.
oh yeah.
And this one maybe more than one day, which is fine, but the reward from that is like you can't. It's very hard to beat.
This is just it. Now, let's talk a bit about this, because when you provide an experience for somebody, they never forget an experience. So was I featuring the open house or the house in question? The tip of the spear is the experience, and then you Velcro the content to that experience.
Mm.
That's why I'm in the Speaker Hall of Fame with Zig Ziglar, Og Mandino, Jim Rohn, Ronald Reagan. I mean, how does a guy at 36, 37 years old end up in the Speaker Hall of Fame with a bunch of guys that are dead now? It was the tip of the spear was when I take people on this Olympic journey in my speeches. I'm not talking about me. I'm saying you're standing on the side of a 42-degree slope. You're going to go 0 to 60 miles an hour in 3 seconds. You're going to have to 125 miles an hour in 8 seconds. You're there. I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about the experience you have. And then I take content of this Olympic journey, Velcro that in. If you never forget an experience and you Velcro content to it, that recipient will internalize that and make it their own. So these realtors would associate this experience with an open house or real estate that I had. I mean, it's just competing smarter. So
And we talked a little bit about that on when we recorded the podcast about, using your imagination and creating those internal experiences and making them very, very vivid. So, exactly what not just this is what I want, but knowing what it feels like to have that or to
yeah,
be there.
yeah, very much so. And so all of these 4 columns are about that, under the banner of do what the competition is not willing to do. So quickly, the other 3 are the physical things you could do. Within selling real estate, it was role playing with somebody that knows what it's like to go to a for sale by owner and convert them into giving up that percentage of their equity, right? Or to go to an expired listing who was really pissed that their realtor did not do their job. Or role playing. I was role playing. What do you say in these situations instead of just doing what the competition's, do what they're not willing to do. The third column was I called it technical. And basically, in a word, it's research. Research in a way the competition's not willing to research. So, and by the way, don't forget, my competition were the top 16 guys in the world. What are they not willing to do in terms of research? And so, you know what it was? It was the library. I went to the library, and in the library, you take a section, and there's an entire section on, let's say, aerodynamic principles, right? And there was a book there, The Love of Laminar Flow, Aerodynamics and You. You know, which athletes are reading that book? None. And in there was the phone number for the wind tunnel at the Boeing factory in Seattle. I called up this wind tunnel, and you know what you hear when you call up that number? Wind tunnel. And so you're talking to the guy that runs the wind tunnel. And then he says, well, make sure you've paid in advance. I went, paid in advance? He says, yeah, you got to, in order to get here, you have to have a docket. A docket? How much? It's about $1,500 every 15 minutes. And I went, can you sneak me in? He said, well, this is a federally regulated facility. We're not sneaking you in. And so all of a sudden I ended up having to hang up with a dead end. But when you do what the competition's not willing to do, and a dead end like that, I can't afford a wind tunnel, but I can afford a friend with a really fast car. So got the ski rack, put the skis on top of the car, got in my pink rubber suit. Now it was pink because it was free, that's why. And then got on top of the car and started to learn aerodynamic principles on top of a buddy's car. Do I recommend that? No, not necessarily. But do what the competition's not willing to do, and you will be able to research or the technical things associated with how are the skis made. In the real estate business, what happens with the statistics in terms of not just open houses, but advertising. I found that 2% of advertising turned into a sale. Why would you spend all hundreds and thousands of dollars on advertising when it only turns into 2% of the sale? So I advertised, again, to the realtors. I went to the people that had 5, 10, 15 clients each, and I advertised to them very, very pointedly, knowing what district they're in, and made that advertising and back then, this is in the late 80s. There was no internet back then. So to be able to focus in, increase the odds of getting a sale as well. And then quickly, the fourth column was mental. And this is actually the answer to your question. What were those top performers not willing to do? A lot of it was surrounding a discipline around mental training. And so I reduced the amount of physical training that I was doing, which is what the competition wasn't willing to do, and increased the amount of mental training to almost a comical degree. It was over 2 hours a day, mental training, biofeedback, sensory deprivation float tanks, hypnosis programs, adapted hypnosis programs utilized in the sensory deprivation float tanks. I mean,
you were doing this in the 80s?
Yeah, late 80s,
Wow.
And early 90s. Yeah.
That's because there's a lot of those things that I've experienced today, and I talk to people today about them, specifically the sensory deprivation in the float tanks and things like that. And a lot of people today aren't doing those things. You were way ahead of your time.
It was so available, and this is a case in point. When you dial in on the outcome of where you want to go with those 5 senses, the experience we talked about in the previous podcast and interviews, and have an experience, the emotional buzz of what that is, stuff shows up. I mean, I think it's in The Alchemist. If you want something bad enough, the universe will conspire to get it for you. Well, I'd read about a sensory deprivation float tank and having gone to the library, right? And so I heard about it. We had hosted the Olympic Winter Games. There was a ton of sports psychologists in Calgary at the time. I called up every one of them I knew, and none of them knew of a sensory deprivation float tank in Calgary. They say, basically the answer was, it doesn't exist here. I've heard of them, but they don't exist. And they didn't really even think that, well, why would you do that, right? I got out of the parking lot of the real estate office, and I had a shortcut to get home, and it was down an alley, went down that alley, turned left, and a woman is coming out of this tanning salon or whatever she had, kind of tanning, massage, it was a bit of everything. And she's putting out a sign, and the sign said float tank, right? And so I slowed down. It's all happening in slow motion, like underwater. Like, what's happening? and she said, I said, is this a sensory deprivation float tank? And she says, yeah, the first one in the city. And I went, have I got a deal for you? I mean, obviously you want to advertise. I can get you in the newspaper. She said, you can? I said, I can, but here's the deal. I want to get the Olympics. Blah, blah, blah. And so within 30 seconds, we did a sponsorship deal, but I would have unlimited access to the sensory deprivation float tank. And I did indeed get her on all the media. The media were just fascinated that an Olympic potential was getting into a float tank, just imagining what it was like. You know what she did? Later, she installs underwater speakers in this thing. Okay, so having gone to the library, there's a domino effect to being able to put yourself on a path, and it hits another domino and another domino. So I'm at the library. I'm in the section on mental training strategies. I find a book, no, it's an audio hypnosis album called Skiing with the Wind. It was actually cassettes. Listen to these cassettes on Skiing with the Wind, and he was talking about turning with finesse, and I thought, that's not exactly right. And I thought, well, why don't I rewrite the script and take this script to my dad, who is a radio TV broadcaster. And my dad said, Vince, you're crazy. Stop this. So I took it to my mom and she had, the maternal bond. And I had an audio hypnosis script specific to my sport that my mom was reading to me for hypnosis that I was doing once a day minimum, taking that then audio hypnosis album and taking it in the sensory deprivation float tank. And if you don't know what this is, it's 10 inches of water, 1,100 pounds of Epsom salts in this thing. The salt content is so high, you literally lay on top of the water. And here's a tip, face up. And the water is body temperature, and it's totally enclosed. So body temperature, you don't feel anything, you don't see anything, you don't hear anything because your ears are underwater. You're not smelling and tasting anything. Sensory deprivation. There's no stimulus happening to the five senses. When you have no stimulus to the five senses, what happens to the subconscious mind? It just starts to open up, and then the field of possibility is expanded to beyond comprehension, because in a second of time, your conscious mind uses 2,000 neurons while your subconscious mind is utilizing 4 billion neurons. So why not take an audio hypnosis album specific to speed seeing with your mom's voice and have that in the sensory deprivation float tank, right? I could go to my competitors and tell them what I was doing, and they would go, I mean, what are you doing? And so this is how you can show, and it wasn't big things. This didn't even cost me anything. It cost me time, over 2 hours a day of mental training. But after 2 years, and using gold dots. Oh, here it is. Yeah. So this gold dots, you see that right there. The gold dot is a trigger for your emotional buzz. When you see that gold dot, it's a trigger for, I'm the fastest speedster in Canada, top 10 in the world. If I'm fastest in the nation, no politics in sport. If I'm top 10 in the world, then I've qualified for the Olympic team. And that gold dot's not true to the conscious mind, but the subconscious mind goes, thank you. So every time you are the architect for your truth. And if the truth has an emotional buzz attached to it, marching in the opening ceremonies of the Olympic Games, are you kidding me? How awesome would that feel? What would it look like, smell like, taste like, all the five senses? And so every time you see that gold dot, you'd gravitate towards that truth. After 2 years of mental training and biofeedback, sensory deprivation flow tanks, the hypnosis, all this combination of all of them, meditation. After the third World Cup of the year, I was ranked 10th in the world. I saw it on the World Cup standings, the points, World Cup points, 10th place in the world, Vince Poscente. Now, is that a coincidence? Or are you the architect for your truth? Are you the architect for where you want to end up? And so, I mean, if I could encourage anybody paying attention to this podcast, this life that you're leading is by your design. And we talked about this a little bit earlier as well. Not just your design, but at the exact same time, letting go. I did a podcast with a local church here. They got, 15,000 members, right? And, and, it wasn't exactly a Christian message that they were getting from me, but certainly there is a universal energy, if you will, or God, which was putting it in context of what they wanted to hear. There is, you can call it design or God's purpose for you, or however you want to word this. In that effort to be able to be deliberate is the same time being able to let go and allow, right? And so this whole journey to the Olympic Games was, I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I know there was an emotional buzz attached to marching in the opening ceremonies. I don't know why it was there. I don't know what message I was getting from the universe or God or whatever you think, however you want to frame this. It was just simply there. And so to honor that by letting go of what it should look like or how it should be, so driving towards a specific goal and letting go of that goal at the same time, that's the art of the human experience.
That's so funny because I talk about that all the time. Every podcast I'm on, and because that's what I feel like, the basis to my success, the way I explain it is I have, and I didn't learn this, it was just something innate, but I reverse engineered it and figured it, saw it. And it's the ability to be completely focused on what I want to achieve and take massive action towards that, but at the same time, simultaneously be open to all the possibilities around me. So
Yeah,
I'm not opposed to pivoting just because this outcome is what I want right now doesn't mean it's where I'm supposed to be. I like, for instance, if you would have talked to me 12 years ago, I would have said, when you said, where are you going to be in 10 years or 12 years? I would have said, I'm going to be opening my fifth restaurant, building my restaurant
right.
empire, doing that whole thing. And so that's what I was working towards. That's what I wanted to do. But here I sit doing, engrossed in media, doing podcasts, doing interviews, having conversations with people such as yourself who are Olympic athletes. And I can honestly say, and the clients that I work with, I can honestly say I am 100,000 times more fulfilled doing this than I would have been cooking today
Right.
professionally. And
Right.
I didn't know this was even available at the time, but events happened. I was open to the possibilities. And I always believe that God is guiding me in a direction if I'm open to allowing him into my life to work in certain ways. But God also gave us free will. The number one gift that God gave us is life. The number two gift he gave us is free will. And free will means we can make our own decisions and we can go in certain directions. And he will play in those directions that we choose to go. But if we choose to go in the directions where he's guiding us, where we're being pulled, then you start to see these things pop up. You start to see
Sure.
coincidences, synchronicities, and all of those labels that we give it. But,
Yeah.
I always say whenever you push something, it tends to push back. But if you go where you're pulled, it gives you the capacity to look around and see the opportunity. And so
Yeah.
I always try to go where I'm being led as opposed to saying, this is what I want and where I want to be and what I'm going to do. Because if I would have gone that way, I would still be in the restaurant right now and we wouldn't be having this conversation. And this
Right.
is where I really feel like I'm supposed to be and meant to be. So I
Yeah.
just echo what you said. You did it at a much higher level, being an Olympic athlete. But I
Yeah.
feel that in my life as well. Those same principles that you talked about.
Yeah, it's a case. The first term that comes to mind is faith over force. If you at any point you feel like you're forcing the situation, uh, ask yourself, am I in the state of faith that this will happen rather than willing it into being? Because if you want just scientific backing, look at the activity of the conscious and subconscious mind. Look at the ratio between an ant and an elephant. Your ant is trying to force an outcome when the elephant, the subconscious mind, which is a conduit to universal energy and God, if you will, then what's the ant going to do? Force the elephant? Or is there a collaboration at play? Is there this alignment at play? Is this alignment? And let's say the ant, the subconscious mind, is going the wrong direction for all sorts of reasons: childhood wounds, deservability, patterns that you start to lose your confidence. I mean, all this stuff. Well, okay. Is this taking you closer to this emotional buzz of yours or further away? And if it's further away, acknowledge the subconscious mind, this conduit, is misaligned. Is saying, well, wait a minute. Yeah, thank you, but that's not part of my vision. And let's end up here. I'll give you a quick example. When I was a kid, young, I saw a politician speak, isn't it, in Canada, Peter Lougheed, an Alberta politician, spoke to 5,000 people as he was leaving politics. And I was only 12 or 11. And I went, oh my God, I want to be a politician, right? And so I was determined to do what he does because I just knew at my core that being able to have that kind of impact and influence, to make a difference in the world like he did, to be leave the campsite better than I found it, all this stuff, that was my evidence. That's where I was willing my way to go. And then over time, the speaking business showed up and the Olympics showed up and all this. And I went, wait a minute, why would I want to, why would I so locked in on being a politician when this other industry kept going, come over here, come here, come on. And so finally I paid attention to it. Okay. And so walked over, opened that door, the mathematics of opportunity. What's behind this door? Oh, wow. There's a junior achievement event. Can you speak at that? Sure. Okay. Open another door. Oh, a women's Christian auxiliary group. Okay. So I opened that door. And then there was a Boston Scientific that was looking for somebody to help them with the Olympic. Okay, open that door. Century 21, and it just happened because you are in alignment with your conscious and subconscious, your ant and your elephant, that you have an emotional buzz. Who's to say what that means? But who's to say that you should deny that feeling? Who's to say that you should not pay attention to something that does not make sense? But if it feels right, pay attention to it.
Yeah, awesome stuff, man. And one other thing I want to mention before we wrap this up is when you talk about float tanks and float therapy, I'm a huge fan. I mean, I went check because I like if I see something, I want to try it just to get the experience and see what it does. So
Yeah,
I've done like cryotherapy, I've done PEMF stuff, I've done all kinds of different things. But I love the float tanks. And
yeah,
when I went, the gentleman who owned it, we had sat and had a conversation, and he told me that when you first go in, the first time it takes a little bit of time to get there because it's hard to fully relax right away. But he said the magic really happens from his experience on the third session, because at that time you're already used to the experience. You go in, you get into it right away, and you really experience for that extended period of time. Because I do it, I've done them in hour sessions,
right.
and the thing that was really cool is you don't realize how much noise your mind makes
Mm.
until you don't have this external stuff distracting you. So when you're in there, it's like, and the way he explained it was brilliant because I saw it. It's like when you're working on your computer and you have all those tabs open, you have like 18 tabs open at once and you're flipping back and forth. That's kind of how your mind is. And when you get into that place where everything else is blocked out, you can start to see and close these tabs one by one. And then once they're all closed, it's just you and yourself and your unconscious mind, and some really interesting things start to happen. Ideas, insights, even experiences. I mean, there were times that I've been in there that I felt like I wasn't in there. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know where I was or what was happening, but like you would see things and that were very interesting. Did you have those types of experiences too while you were doing
I've
that?
been in the float tank. I lost track. It's well over 250 times.
Wow.
And it is not dissimilar from meditation, where you don't have access to a float tank. You do have access to a chair. And if you let go and close your eyes, and every time a thought appears, let go of that thought. Another thought appears. You have to notice you're having the thought, because the thought will lead to another thought. And then all of a sudden, wait a minute, I'm having thoughts. And so you let go of that thought and get back into meditation. The same deal. It's like these springs are being released. And the more springs you get released, the less pressure and stress you have. And so really, I felt that it was a conduit to less stress. And peak performance happens when stress is managed. Peak performance gets out of hand when there's a stress response, where the part of the brain, the amygdala, is kicked in, where it's fight, flight, or freeze. I mean, none of those three things will help us as we're COVID camping right now. None of those things will help as we transition out of this lock-in. And none of these things will happen, will serve you in a relationship or finance or physical fitness or any of that, any kind of stress response. So to be able to put yourself in a setting where you can let go of those, the subconscious mind is firing off. We don't even understand how it works. But I can tell you this: if you allow that, this peace of mind can happen, if you allow that, this faith over force, if you allow yourself to be innovative and do what the competition's not willing to do, you can drive towards something and let go and just allow, create at the same time. There's no silver bullet, but this float tank or meditation or whatever, prayer even, is just is an opportunity to move yourself forward and enjoy this journey, rather than going, what do I do? What's next? How do I do this? How do I make it happen? Ah!
I hear you, man. Thank you so much for everything on the podcast episodes. I mean, if you're watching this on social media, the podcast episodes will be dropping very soon, so keep an eye out for those. If you're listening to this on the podcast, then you can go back and listen to those right now if you haven't heard them yet. Vince, thank you so much for being here. VincePoscente.com. Again, the book, The Elephant and the Ant. Grab a copy of that while you're there.
The ant and the
I've had
elephant.
The Ant and the Elephant. I'm sorry. Did I say that wrong?
Yeah,
Did I invert them? The Ant
yeah.
and the Elephant. I read them right, but I said them wrong. My
They're
unconscious
there.
mind's playing tricks. In any case, thank you so much. This has been a ton of fun, and let's definitely do this again soon, my friend.
All right, right. Just anytime. Take care.